That morning, a thin veil of mist blanketed Seattle like a melancholy quilt spread across the city. In a high-rise room with glass walls on three sides, Ethan Graves, the founder and CEO of the Aurora Diner restaurant chain, stood motionless in front of the window. The cup of coffee in his hand had long gone cold, but in his mind, hundreds of thoughts surged like crashing waves in a silent storm. 15 years ago, Ethan had started with a small pushcart on a street corner, just a few wooden stools, a frying pan for eggs, and a dream to serve meals that felt as warm as the name Aurora, the first light of dawn. But today, that dawn was slowly fading, revenue was plummeting, customer complaints were piling up, cold food, distant staff, a gloomy atmosphere. Internal reports still painted a pretty picture: sustainable growth strategy, stable Q4 performance, strong team cohesion, so perfect. It felt fake. Ethan suddenly realized not a single number in those reports told him what was actually happening inside the restaurants he had built with his own two hands. And if he didn't see it with his own eyes, maybe, just maybe, he was becoming one of those CEOs who sees everything through PowerPoint. That morning, he didn't take his private car, no chauffeur, no meetings scheduled, just a faded jacket and a fabric cap pulled low enough to conceal most of his face. He quietly stepped into the first Aurora Diner branch, the very place where, 15 years ago, he used to wash pans, greet customers, and promise himself he'd never forget why he started. No one recognized him. No one even smiled to say hello. The tables were cold and bare. A few scattered customers sat in silence, and the morning air was filled with nothing but the scent of weak coffee and the heavy footsteps of weary servers. He chose a quiet table by the window, where the early light slanted across a steaming cup of black coffee. The menu in his hand was so familiar, he could recite it by heart. But today, reading it again, it felt foreign, like stepping into his own dream for the first time, but through the eyes of a complete stranger. Suddenly, there were light footsteps. A gentle voice spoke. "Good morning, sir. What would you like today?" He looked up. In front of him stood a young woman, probably in her early 20s. Her Aurora uniform was faded, the cuffs slightly frayed. Her eyes were clear, but beneath her lashes lingered something like a morning fog that never quite lifted a sadness she tried to hide. Ethan smiled softly. "I haven't decided yet. Got any recommendations?" She hesitated briefly, then smiled just a little, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "The fresh pancakes are pretty good today, but if you're looking for something more filling, the sunny side-up eggs with toast are decent too." Ethan caught a flicker of discomfort in her eyes when she said more filling. A strange feeling welled up inside him, and he blurted out a question even he didn't expect. "And you? Have you had breakfast yet?" The girl paused, startled, her eyes dimmed, and her hand clenched the small notepad at her side. Then, almost in a whisper, she replied, "I usually skip breakfast to save money for my mum and little brother. Lately, I've been picking up early shifts, but the tips aren't great. Around here, employees have to pay if they want to eat, She said it like it was a truth too familiar, a truth no one bothered to question anymore. Ethan said nothing. He just felt a weight sink deep into his chest like a stone dropped into the very bottom of his soul. He stayed at that old table for a long time. The coffee in front of him had gone completely cold, yet no one came back to check on him. No one cared about a quiet man sitting alone for hours in the corner of a restaurant that bore his own name. He lifted his head and looked around. The wall art, the pinned-up menus, the soft yellow neon lights. They were all still there, but the soul of the place was gone. This used to be a place filled with laughter. Staff called each other by name. Regulars had their tea and toast preferences remembered. But now, Ethan saw only tired faces, avoiding each other's eyes, moving like worn-out clockwork. His gaze followed Mira, the young woman who had served him, as she moved silently from table to table with mechanical precision. Not a single unnecessary word, not a single moment of rest, just those small hands constantly moving between trays, towels, and receipts. Ethan saw something familiar in her stride. It was exactly like himself, 15 years ago, working back-to-back 12-hour shifts, hands cracked from scrubbing, still smiling when customers called his name. But no one called Mira by name. Even the small name tag on her chest had faded to a blur. Around 10 a.m., the diner began to quiet down. Mira took a moment behind the counter, slipping off her gloves and gently rubbing her wrist. Her face remained calm, the kind of calm that only comes after you've made peace with exhaustion. Ethan was about to get up and order another coffee, partly out of curiosity, partly because he wanted to keep talking. But just then, a low argument caught his attention, coming from the storage area where deliveries were usually received. He slowly walked over and positioned himself behind a dividing wall. Just sign it. Don't look too hard. The greens are only a little wilted. Yeah, don't bother checking. Just bring it in like usual. The voice belonged to Garrett, the branch manager, tall build, slicked back hair, wearing a luxury watch. Ethan watched him sign the receipt and shake hands with the delivery guy. Very casual, very smooth, as if it was a ritual that happened every week. Ethan frowned. As the owner of the chain, he knew exactly how strict Aurora Diner's ingredient standards were. Those bundles of vegetables yellowing, with some torn leaves, clearly didn't meet kitchen requirements. But Garrett didn't even bother to look. An unsettling feeling crept into Ethan's chest, not because of the produce, but because of the blatant disregard for the customers, for the staff being carried out in plain daylight. As Garrett turned to leave the storage room, Ethan caught a glimpse of him slipping a small envelope into the inner pocket of his jacket. He clenched his fist, but forced himself to stay calm. Returning to his table, Ethan's mind swirled with thoughts, and then, like a dam breaking, he began to notice more, not with the eyes of a CEO, but with the heart of someone who once believed in genuine values. A staff member wiped down a table, but didn't dare lift her head when a customer complained. A cook silently plunged his hands into near-boiling water without gloves. An older woman, likely a kitchen assistant, nodded off from exhaustion, but still pushed herself to stand as the bell rang for another order. Ethan felt lost inside the very place he had created. No one recognized him. But the most painful truth was that he no longer recognized Aurora himself. By noon, the diner began to fill up. The sound of kitchen bells, silverware clinking on porcelain, and quiet sighs trying to hide behind rushed service filled the air. Ethan remained seated, just another nameless guest inside what was once the symbol of passion and beginnings. Mira returned to his table, holding the plate he had ordered that morning: crisp toast, sunny side up, eggs, and a small side of salad. She placed it down gently, avoided eye contact, and turned to walk away. Ethan called out softly, "Thank you." Mira. Right. She froze for a moment. Her eyes glanced at him, surprised that a stranger remembered her name, the name most customers never bothered to read, and co-workers only muttered in passing. Mira gave a small nod. "Yes. That's me." Ethan hesitated for a second, then asked, not out of curiosity anymore, but out of genuine care, "You said you usually skip breakfast. Were you able to eat something for lunch, at least?" Mira smiled, a gentle smile, but sad, like the endless receipt in the hand of a single mother trying to make things work. "I just grabbed some leftover crumbs in the kitchen. As long as I don't faint from hunger, I'll be fine." Ethan was speechless. She said it so lightly, like it was just another normal day. No complaints, no plea for sympathy, just surviving in the way someone without any other option simply has to keep going. "Why don't you ask the manager for help? Aurora has a hardship support policy for staff, you know." As soon as the words left his mouth, Mira let out a quiet laugh this time, the laugh of someone who's long grown used to pretty policies that live only on paper. "The policy is real. Sure, but we have to fill out 7 forms, get 3 signatures, wait weeks, and in the end, we just get a meal voucher deducted from our paycheck." She looked down at the floor, her voice softening. "I need money to buy medicine for my mom and pay my little brother's tuition this semester. I can't afford to wait on things that may never come." Ethan felt like someone had punched him in the chest. A part of him wanted to leap up, storm into the manager's office, slam his fist on the desk and shout, "How could you let my employees live like this?" But he didn't. Not yet. Because Mira, still standing there, didn't need rescuing. She just needed to be heard. "Have you ever thought about quitting?" Ethan asked. The question left Mira silent for a long moment. She reached into her pocket and touched a small folded cloth, as if needing something to hold on to. Then she answered, "Of course I have. Many times. Especially on the days when my mum can't even hold a spoon to eat porridge, and I still have to come into work. But if I quit, what will she eat? How will my brother go to school?" She looked up. For the first time, her eyes met Ethan's directly clear, strong, and deeply sad. "I don't need anyone to save me. Honestly, I just need a place where, if I work hard, I can actually live. For real." She bowed her head slightly, then turned and walked away. Ethan didn't call her back. He simply watched her small figure disappear behind the kitchen counter. A chill ran down his spine, not from the cold coffee, but from a painful realization. In a restaurant chain named after the morning light, there are people walking through each day as if living in a permanent twilight. He placed a hand over his chest, where his heart still beat, but slower than usual. Maybe this was the first jolt meant to wake up a man who thought he was succeeding. Outside the window, the afternoon light softened, casting the gentle glow of a late autumn day across the worn tile floor of Aurora Diner. Ethan remained seated in the corner, unnoticed by anyone, and in that very invisibility, he finally saw things no report had ever mentioned. Around 2 p.m., the kitchen grew quieter. Staff used the downtime to wipe surfaces, check inventory, and reorganize the service area. Ethan rose from his seat and slowly walked toward the back, the area marked "Staff Only." He stopped at the threshold, not crossing the line, but close enough to see. The storage room had a strange, stale smell, not the scent of fresh goods, but a musty, dull odor, like products long past their prime. On the shelves were trays of pale meat, wilted greens, and limp tomatoes. A staff member was jotting notes, but their eyes kept darting away, avoiding contact. Ethan scanned the room, and there he was again, Garrett, the morning shift manager. He was chatting comfortably with a supplier who had just arrived, the very same man Ethan had seen handing off the envelope earlier that day. This time, there was no subtlety. They laughed together like old friends. A new employee fumbled to find a spot to place the goods, and Garrett barked, "Just dump it wherever. Who has time to inspect every damn item?" The employee nodded quietly and followed orders without a word. Ethan felt his gut tighten. He remembered the quality control report from this very location, sent to headquarters just a week ago. 100% compliance, fresh ingredients, transparent supply chain. The comments even read, "Management team maintains excellent oversight." Ethan had approved those reports in good faith. But now, seeing wilted greens and fish that no longer smelled of the sea, he finally understood. A beautiful report can be made in Excel, but trust once broken by a single lie shatters forever. He returned to the service area. Along the way, he quietly observed the people keeping Aurora alive each day, not through strategy, but through sheer effort and quiet endurance. An older staff member hunched over, scrubbing glasses with a curved back, never uttering a single complaint. A young boy, probably new, clumsily dropped a spoon and was harshly scolded. He bit his lip and bore it in silence, and Mira still clearing tables, her eyes tired but her steps unwavering. She stood beside the table of a single mother with 2 small children. When one of the kids accidentally spilled a glass of water, Mira didn't scold. She just smiled gently. "It's okay, little one. Let me wipe it up for you." Ethan watched that moment, a lump forming in his throat. Someone like her, forced to split tips, surviving on kitchen scraps, still managed to preserve her kindness, fully and unbroken. Not long after, Mira stepped into the cramped back break room. Ethan overheard faint whispers. Mira has to give half her tips to the manager. If she doesn't, it gets deducted straight from her paycheck. And if she complains, she's out the door. Ethan stood frozen, not out of surprise, but out of shame. He had allowed the very system he built to become a machine that crushed goodness. He remembered his early days, boldly declaring on national TV, "Aurora doesn't just serve meals, it serves dignity. We're building a workplace where no one has to bow their head for being poor." And yet, now, people like Mira had to bow their heads for real because of the very uniform he had designed. Outside, the Seattle sky had turned a shade of grayish purple, but inside Ethan, a storm was beginning to rise. He understood this wasn't just about Mira anymore. It was about a system that had veered off course and a founder who needed to stop before it swept away everything beautiful he had once envisioned. Afternoon shadows stretched across the gray tile floor of Aurora Diner. The bell from the kitchen rang out constantly, pressing against the backs of every server. Rushed footsteps, clipped words, and smiles, all quick, all weary, and all hollow. Ethan remained seated in his corner, trying to count how many staff members genuinely smiled at customers. The number he came up with, one, and that one was Mira. She continued moving between tables, delivering food, wiping surfaces, greeting guests. The only difference was, each time she turned away, she'd quickly pull out a small cloth to dab at her eyes. Ethan noticed that girl was crying, but silently, and with intention, as if she had learned exactly when to let tears fall in the gaps between where the security cameras could see. Why did she have to cry in silence like that? Why did she have to smile while her body was clearly running on empty? He didn't need to ask, because everything happening around him was already the answer. Around 3 p.m., a customer complained that their toast was slightly burnt. Garrett, the manager, stepped out immediately, but instead of taking responsibility, he pointed straight at Mira. "You made this, didn't you? Where's your head today? People come here to eat, not to test the crunch on charred food." Mira lowered her head. She said nothing. The entire diner fell silent. Some customers looked away. A few staff members bit their lips, as if they'd seen this before. Ethan rose halfway from his seat, then stopped, not out of fear of being recognized, but because he wanted to listen. He needed to know just how far the system he built had fallen. Garrett continued, louder this time. "How many times do I have to tell you? You still get tip bonuses every month. If you can't handle the job, then leave at that moment." Ethan's hand clenched tightly. Tips, bonuses. No, those were not incentives. They were tokens of gratitude from customers who felt moved. Hard-earned acknowledgements for hour after hour of genuine effort. And now, it was being twisted into a weapon for threats. Moments later, after Garrett left, Two younger staff members huddled in the corner of the kitchen, whispering yesterday. Mira had to hand over half her tips to him again. He said if anyone refuses, he'll deduct it from their paycheck. It's messed up. Ethan stepped back into a shadowed corner. He didn't want them to see him. He didn't want Mira to see him. Because he was ashamed. Truly ashamed. A founder who once stood on stage preaching humanity, who once said, kindness must be nurtured through systems. And now, that very system was doing the opposite, pushing good people to swallow their tears in a diner named after the dawn. He looked toward Mira, who was now clearing a table for an elderly man. She nodded politely, poured water, straightened the napkin, said, "Thank you, everything a perfect server was supposed to do." But only Ethan noticed. On the back of her faded uniform, a small tear fluttered in the fan's breeze like a silent cry for help. A place that was once created to give employees pride was now draining their dignity, one day at a time. And in that very moment, in the fading afternoon light, inside a restaurant filled with the clinking of cutlery but starved of human connection, Ethan knew he could no longer sit still. Dusk settled. Outside the window, the last sunlight lay gently like a thin golden carpet. But inside Ethan, a fire had begun to burn, not just simple anger, but a deep, simmering rage built up minute by minute as he watched Mira being treated with cruelty, as he overheard the fearful whispers between staff, as he witnessed Garrett's actions. What Ethan could now no longer deny was blatant corruption taking place right inside Aurora. He walked briskly into the restroom, closed the door, and braced both hands on the sink. His breathing was heavy, his eyes bloodshot. The face staring back at him in the mirror wasn't that of a CEO, a keynote speaker, or an inspirational founder. It was the face of a man who had fallen asleep inside the very dream he once vowed to protect. Old words echoed in his mind. We didn't build Aurora just to serve food. We built it so that ordinary people could make a living through decency. And yet here was Mira, a girl not even 23, having to choose between eating breakfast herself and buying medicine for her mother. Ethan suddenly remembered his own mother, the woman who raised him alone, making a living with handmade bread. He remembered those early mornings when she woke at 4 a.m. The scent of slightly burnt loaves, the sound of her voice. Never forget this. Sun bread can burn, but kindness must never grow cold. Ethan. And it was his mother who first chipped in money to help him buy that very first food cart, the humble beginning that laid the first brick of what would become the Aurora Empire. Now he was standing in the middle of that empire, but feeling like a stranger in his own kingdom. All the core values he once fought for, honesty, humanity, fairness, had been reduced to nothing more than faded slogans on dusty wall plaques. Ethan tapped his fist lightly against the mirror, not hard enough to break it, but enough to redden his hand. No one had hurt Mira more than Garrett, but the person who gave Garrett the power was him. He stepped out of the restroom, returned to the dining area, and saw Mira gathering unpaid receipts, her expression slightly flustered. Another paper slipped from her pocket. It was a hospital bill. Long lines of numbers, Central Medical Center, the cost of ongoing treatment. Mira quickly picked it up and tucked it back into her pocket, then looked up. That same gentle smile, as if nothing had happened. The same clear eyes, but behind them, a tightly sealed ocean. And in that moment, Ethan understood. This was no longer about a single branch, a single employee, or a single morally bankrupt manager. It was about the soul of Aurora slowly being drained each day by silence, apathy, and the resignation of its own founder. He stood up, said nothing, and walked slowly down the hallway behind the kitchen, the very same hallway where he and his earliest teammates once baked each loaf, brewed every cup of coffee. On the wall still hung a faded black and white photo, the grand opening day of the very first Aurora. There he was, 25 years old, standing beside a worn-out stainless steel cart, flanked by 3 of his closest companions. Everyone was beaming. Everyone believed that goodness was real. Ethan raised his hand and gently touched the frame. Cold, rigid, but something inside him had just begun to soften. A quiet voice, barely audible, yet impossible to ignore, rose from within. It's time to begin again, from the start, and from the heart. After stepping away from the old photo in the hallway, Ethan didn't return to the customer area. Instead, he continued toward the back, toward the staff break room, which used to be nothing more than a converted storage closet. The brown wooden door was slightly ajar, a faint strip of light spilling through, and from inside came a familiar voice. "Mum, please try to take your medicine. Okay, I'm working late today, but I'll try to come home early." Ethan froze. It was Mira. He wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but her voice, so soft, so real, cut through the air and landed directly in his chest. "I haven't scraped together enough for this week's meds yet. But don't worry. Tomorrow I'll borrow a little from the neighbor. And don't let my little brother find out." Okay, he's got finals coming up. In that moment, Ethan no longer saw the girl in the faded uniform clearing tables out front. What stood before him now was a sister, a daughter, someone straining with all her might to hold on to the most precious things in her life, even though her hands were far too small to carry it all. A cough echoed faintly from the other end of the line. Mira immediately lowered her voice, trembling. "Don't try to talk too much, Mum. I'll warm up the porridge from yesterday when I get home. Just wait for me." "Okay." That final sentence hung in the air, followed by a long silence. Mira was probably biting her lip, trying not to cry. Ethan stepped back. He didn't want her to know he'd heard. Didn't want to break that moment of privacy, the final mask Mira wore to stay strong. But it was that very moment that broke him completely. Someone like Mira, the very person Aurora was draining dry, was the one holding together an entire family. She didn't beg, she didn't complain. She simply worked in silence, saved every cent, and placed what little hope she had in a place once hailed as the most humane restaurant in the city. Ethan turned away, eyes stinging. He remembered all the times he had proudly declared to the press, "We care for our employees like family. Everyone at Aurora deserves to live well, not just work well." And yet, now, in the very first location, this family member was eating scraps, enduring humiliation, and hiding her mother's illness behind every cheerful greeting. Ethan clenched his fists, not out of anger anymore, but from a remorse so deep it ached in his bones. No one had forced him to leave the CEO's office and come here. No one had made him look at these painful truths, but his own heart could no longer let him close his eyes. He turned away slowly, stepping back from the slightly ajar door, and when he looked one last time, all he could see was the golden light gently casting over Mira's small back as she bent forward, adjusting a thin blanket for her mother through the screen of her phone. One person, so small, yet carrying a love far too big. And what hurt him most was that Aurora, his very own dream, was suffocating people like her. Late afternoon, rain began to fall over Seattle. Small, cold, relentless drops pattered onto the metal roof behind the kitchen, the kind of place no one ever passed through unless absolutely necessary. But Ethan stood there, quiet in the dark, beside the restaurant's back exit. He didn't call a cab, didn't return to the hotel, didn't pull out his phone to check emails. He just stood there like someone waiting for something. And then it came. Mira stepped out, alone. She wore a thin scarf, half soaked from the rain, clutching a worn-out fabric tote to her chest. The edge of the bag stuck out, revealing a stack of wrinkled papers. Ethan was sure they were hospital bills. She walked fast, as if every second mattered, as if any delay might cost her the last fragile hope of the day. When she reached the narrow path beside the dumpsters, she paused, pulled out a few crumpled coins, counted them, then put them back. Just enough for the bus, not a cent extra. Ethan held his breath. Mira glanced around. No customers, no co-workers. She sat down on the cold concrete steps, exhaled. She didn't cry. She didn't complain. She just sat there, alone, beneath the soft drizzle. Her body curled slightly, one hand resting over her stomach as if to keep warm, or to soothe the dull ache of a day-long hunger. Ethan had never seen anyone so beautiful, not for her appearance, but for the light within her that refused to go out, even as the world kept pouring water to extinguish it. A bus passed by. Mira stood up, adjusted her scarf, pulled her collar higher, and walked briskly toward the stop. Ethan took a step forward, then stopped. He understood. If he stepped in now, if he revealed who he really was, Mira might be surprised, might be grateful, might finally get the help she needed. But that would be the wrong way, because what she needed wasn't a savior in the rain. She needed a system that didn't force her to live this way. He stood still and watched the bus pull away, its red lights fading into the curtain of white rain. His heart was no longer confused. Mira's silence, was the loudest wake-up call Ethan had ever received. She didn't cry for help, but she bore it all. She didn't fight back, but still walked forward every single day. If he didn't act now, not just Mira, but dozens, hundreds like her would go on living in the shadows he had unknowingly cast, with his neglect, with numbers that looked right, and with trust placed in all the wrong people. Ethan lifted his head. The rain still fell, but inside him a ray of light had begun to rise. Tomorrow he would return, but not in a faded jacket or with a cap pulled low. He would return as himself, as the CEO, and this time to make things right. The next morning, the Seattle sky was crystal clear after a long night of rain. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the high-rise windows, landing directly on the front glass of the Aurora Diner branch, once a symbol of hope, now little more than a hollow shell. No one knew what was coming today, but something in the air already felt different. Employees whispered to one another. Rumor is there's a surprise inspection from HQ, the regional directors coming down. There's even a security team with them. Garrett, the manager, tried to appear calm, but the stack of papers in his hand trembled slightly. He kept adjusting his tie, signaling to staff to stand up straight, wipe tables fast, and not make a scene. And then, at exactly 9 Hygia, the large glass doors swung open. All eyes turned toward the man who stepped inside navy blue suit, polished name badge over his heart, Ethan Graves, CEO and founder, Aurora Diner. No old hat pulled low, no slow steps like a regular customer. Standing before them was the man who had built this entire system from nothing but 2 bare hands. Silence. Heavy. Stunned. And tense. It all swirled in the air like a storm about to hit. Mira stood at the register. She gasped, accidentally dropping her small notepad. She didn't say a word, just stood there, eyes wide, unable to believe what she was seeing. Ethan stepped into the center of the lobby. His gaze swept across every face, not with anger, not with blame, but with the clarity of someone who had walked through the deepest valley of disappointment. His voice, low but firm, echoed, "I believe. It's time we had a very honest conversation." Garrett swallowed hard. Some staff lowered their heads. Mira remained frozen, still trying to catch her breath. Moments later, the entire team was summoned to the second-floor meeting room, once a space for small award ceremonies, now transformed into a quiet room of reckoning. Ethan stood before the large screen. At his side were 2 security staff and 1 representative from corporate legal. He gave a slight nod. The screen lit up. Clip 1, Garrett shaking hands with the supplier, accepting an envelope. Clip 2, Mira sitting alone in the corner of the stockroom, quietly wiping her tears, a hospital bill trembling in her hands. Clip 3, audio recording of the threat to staff about tip payments. Garrett's voice, clear and sharp. "If you don't hand it over, it gets deducted straight from your paycheck. That's how it works here. If you can't handle it, then quit." Garrett's face turned ghostly pale. Sweat began trickling down the side of his temple. He stammered, I was just following the cutback directives. Ethan didn't need to hear more. He stepped forward, voice calm, yet every word landed like a hammer. "You're fired, effective immediately. And to be clear, your violations will be submitted to the board of directors and to the authorities." The room went dead silent. Ethan turned to the rest of the team, and those who stood by while this happened, silent, complicit, or enabling stand-up. Now, a long pause. Then, a few heads lowered. A small group of employees quietly walked out. No excuses. No one stopped them. And then Ethan turned to Mira. She stood in the corner, hands gripping the hem of her shirt, still in shock. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. His voice softened. "Mira, after everything you've been through, why did you stay?" She lowered her head, eyes wet, then whispered, "Because I still believe. One day, Aurora will have its sunrise again." No sound followed, just breathless stillness. Then, Ethan stepped forward and pulled a small bank card from his pocket. He placed it directly in Mira's hand. He said, gently but firmly, "There's $50,000 on this card. It's not charity. It's an investment in you. Starting today, you're the assistant branch manager, and you'll be the first to join the Aurora Rebuild Management Program." Mira broke down, no longer hidden tears but a release after days of living like a shadow. The whole room stood, applauded. Not the kind of clapping driven by fear, but by belief, by hope, because a real light had returned. Ethan took a deep breath. For the first time in years, he felt he wasn't just strategically right, he was right with his conscience. Hello. The meeting room still echoed with applause from Mira's appointment, but Ethan knew the journey was far from over. This wasn't just about righting a wrong for one person. It was about reviving the soul of an entire organization. He turned back toward the room, eyes scanning every face, not to find mistakes this time, but to find the ones still willing to stay, to rebuild. A raspy voice rose slowly from the back, heavy. "Warren, sir, may I ask something? Honestly, is this enough?" All eyes turned toward the speaker, Mark, the veteran sous chef of the branch. He'd worked there nearly 10 years, once the heartbeat of the hot kitchen, now quieted by erosion of trust. His voice was hoarse from exhaustion and from years of unseen hurt. "I've seen good people forced to leave, talented kids crushed until they quit. We're happy for Mira, truly. But one person, what can that change? After all these years, does anyone really believe Aurora can be different again?" The question wasn't defiance. It was the final voice of someone who once believed and had watched that belief die. Silence filled the room. Ethan walked slowly toward Mark, not as a boss, not as a figure of authority, but just one person facing another. He looked Mark in the eye, and as if speaking to his own younger self, 15 years ago, he said, "You're right. One person alone can't change an entire system, but one person who dares to rise can reignite the light for others to follow." Then he turned to the room. "I didn't come here just to fire one man and return to a leather chair in a high-rise office. I came here to say I'm sorry and to start over. not with promises, but with action. Ethan pulled out his phone and quickly dialed a number. Just minutes later, the door swung open. A team entered carrying briefcases, printed policy binders, and updated payroll documents. Ethan announced clearly, "This is the reform team from headquarters, and today we officially launch the Aurora Rebuild Initiative." He pointed to the screen that had just lit up. A 20% increase in base salary for all staff across the entire system, starting next month. 2. Launch of an expanded insurance policy covering not just employees, but their families as well. 3. Creation of the Aurora Emergency Relief Fund. Anyone facing hardship can receive immediate assistance. No red tape required. 4. Kickoff of the Pathfinder program. No matter your age or degree, if you have heart, you will have a fair chance to rise. The room seemed to hold its breath. And then applause. Not the kind prompted by a boss's cue, but the kind that came from somewhere deeper, an applause for a future that once seemed impossible, now beginning for real. Ethan scanned the room until his eyes landed on Mira, sitting by the window. She looked back at him not with confusion, not with self-doubt, but with belief. He leaned down, speaking just loud enough for her to hear. "Mira, you haven't just changed your own life. You're going to bring the light back to this place. Not just Aurora's dawn, but the dawn for all those who were forgotten." Mira nodded, eyes still glassy with tears, but this time, tears of someone who no longer felt alone. That afternoon, soft sunlight poured through the tall windows of Aurora Diner. The space that once felt heavy now felt warm, not just from the light, but from something shifting quietly in people's hearts. In the meeting room, Ethan stood beside a whiteboard where one sentence had been written, "Aurora Rebuild." Rebuilding is not just about changing policies. It's about changing how we see each other. A new wave of emotion had been lit not by slogans, but by real actions, real decisions, and real trust. Down below, Mira was speaking with a small group of young staff members. Her voice was calm, clear, and steady. She was no longer the server wiping away tears in a cold storage room. On her chest now was a new name tag, Mira Collins, Assistant Branch Manager, Aurora Diner, first participant in the Pathfinder program. She was guiding the new recruits, teaching them not just how to welcome guests or serve food, but how to do it with respect. The very thing she was once denied. Now she passed on, not with bitterness, but with grace. Ethan watched quietly from a distance. His gaze paused on something he'd never seen before. Mira's first full smile, a smile with no trace of tears. He turned to Mark, the veteran cook who had raised that hard question earlier in the day. Their eyes met, and for the first time in years, Mark nodded, not with fanfare, just the quiet nod of a man long tired, but beginning to believe again. A few hours later, at a small internal press briefing held at the branch, Ethan made it official. "I used to believe that success meant opening 10 more locations, reaching 20% more in revenue, or signing dozens of new investment deals. But today, I understand. Success is being able to look in the mirror without needing to turn away. It's standing in the middle of your team and knowing you're finally walking the right path. Together. He gestured toward the glass windows. Outside, the tables were full. Servers moved quickly, but their smiles were genuine. Laughter buzzed gently through the space. The smell of fresh-baked pastries floated in the air, just like it did in Aurora's earliest days. Ethan inhaled deeply. That feeling, it wasn't something you could measure in reports. It couldn't be written into KPIs. It could only be felt with the heart. Before leaving, he walked over to Mira, no longer a CEO addressing a subordinate, but a founder, speaking to the one now carrying the soul of his original dream. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder and said, "You weren't just chosen to rise. You helped all of us rise." Mira smiled a smile as bright as the name of the restaurant chain itself. And so, Aurora Diner began again, not with a flashy marketing campaign, not with a new investment round, but with people who dared to stop, truly see what had been lost, and choose to go forward again, this time with heart. By year's end, Seattle slipped quietly into winter. The golden light of day grew softer like a memory. At the very first Aurora Diner branch. The last morning of the year was marked by something that hadn't happened in over a decade. Laughter filled the dining room. Beside the bar stood a small Christmas tree, nothing extravagant, but decorated with small gifts exchanged between employees, a tube of lipstick, a baked cookie, a handwritten note. There were no more tears wiped away in secret corners, no more yelling managers, no more envelopes passed in back alleys. Under the warm glow of ceiling lights, Mira stood in the newly renovated meeting room, no longer the quiet waitress. Now she was Assistant Regional Director. Her name badge sparkled Mira Collins, Assistant Director, Aurora Rising Leaders Program, founding graduate. She was training the program's first-class young men and women just like she once was, who had endured quietly, but now were being truly seen and given space to grow. Ethan watched from the upper floor window. He didn't need to step in. He didn't need to speak. Just seeing her smile fully, confidently, without a trace of pain or hiding. He knew Aurora had come back to life, but this time not just as a brand, as an ecosystem of trust. Downstairs, Mark, the veteran sous chef, was showing a new cook how to control the oven heat for the morning pastries. He worked with a grin, occasionally winking at teammates back in the day. You made one mistake, and it was all yelling. But now, make a mistake, you learn, get it right, and you earn real trust. In the dining area, an elderly woman was enjoying pancakes. A nervous young server helped pull out her chair, hands trembling slightly on his first day. The old woman smiled kindly, and the boy smiled back, not afraid of messing up, not afraid of being blamed, but only afraid of not being kind enough. Ethan smiled and placed his hand on the cool glass window. A breeze swept by, carrying the soft jingle of the front door. A new guest entered, hands still damp from the rain, and Mira greeted him with the very words that once changed her life. "Good morning. Can I recommend a breakfast that's filling and warming to the heart?" The guest chuckled and nodded. And from upstairs, Ethan softly repeated a sentence in his mind, a sentence his mother once taught him, that he forgot, and now lived again more clearly than ever before. The meal may go cold, the money may run short, but kindness, if kept in the right place, can warm an entire little world. Success is not how many locations you open, not how many deals you sign, not how many millions Aurora is worth. It's about how many lives that once bent in silence now stand tall, how many hearts that once strained just to survive now beat boldly because they are trusted, how many people who once thought they were just a server are now called by name and truly heard. There are days you must leave the director's chair and sit in the shoes of a server just to remember what you once promised. That success is not what you achieve, but who you lift along the way. And if someone asks you today, is Aurora still the place where a new day begins? Just smile and say, no, Aurora is where the sunrise never stopped shining.